Former President Bill Clinton says the U.S. Supreme Court should strike down a law he signed 17 years ago that bans same-sex marriage, calling the measure incompatible with the Constitution. Clinton says the justices should overturn the Defense of Marriage Act he signed in 1996 that bars the federal government from recognizing same-sex marriages. He said the law is inconsistent with equality and justice under the law. I've come to believe that Defense of Marriage Act is contrary to those principles and, in fact, incompatible with our Constitution, Clinton wrote in an op-ed article in the Washington Post. Now, I know Bill Clinton, but I'm here to tell you that likewise, prohibiting gay marriage is inconsistent with our values as defined in the Torah and our religious tradition. Values of love, compassion, the centrality of human dignity, fairness, and justice. Our biblical prophets preach the importance of living a righteous life, kindness, benevolence, faith, compassion, a peace-loving disposition, and a truly humble and contrite spirit. Our rabbis taught the importance of ethics as well. Rabbi Hillel formulated the golden rule of Judaism. What is hateful to you, do not do unto others. Rabbi Akiva, a 2nd century rabbi, states, whatever is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. Wherefore do not hurt him, do not speak ill of him, do not reveal his secrets to others. Let his honor be as dear to you as your own. Rabbi Akiva also declared the commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, to be the greatest fundamental commandment of Judaism. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel taught, the world rests on 3 things, justice, truth, and peace. Shalom, peace. It's one of the underlying principles of the Torah, as her ways are pleasant and all her paths are peace. The Talmud explains the entire Torah is for the sake of the ways of shalom, of peace. And Maimonides comments in his Mishnah Torah, great is peace, as the whole Torah was given in order to promote peace in the world, the core ethical virtue. Loving kindness is closely linked with compassion in our tradition. And according to the prophet Jeremiah, lack of compassion marks a people as cruel. My friends, it is indeed cruel and unjust to deny gay men and women the same rights heterosexuals have to marry. And if indeed the purpose of the Torah is to provide shalom, peace and wholeness, then it must be so for one and for all. We cannot use the Torah and several obscure verses as justification for prohibiting the peace and wholeness of 2 people in love simply because they are the same sex. It seems to me that the issue of same-sex marriage is not so much an issue of Jewish law as it is an issue of seichel, common sense. First, if marriage is a divinely sanctioned institution, then we should leave it just the way it was in the time of the Bible. Yet I don't hear very many people in American society advocating for polygamy or concubines. Many biblical institutions have been abandoned or changed over the years, including slavery, charging interest and the death penalty for rebellious children who speak ill of mom and dad. It is simply not true that marriage as we define it today is the same as it was in the Bible. And when I look at a loving relationship between 2 human beings, like Stephanie and Sarah, it's hard for me to say that this is not a marriage. Such couples deserve not only the protection of their civil rights, but the legitimization of their relationship in the eyes of God. In performing a Jewish marriage, a rabbi often Bible speaks of establishing a Bayit Ne'eman B'Yisrael, a faithful house among the people of Israel. Marriage is about procreation, but it is about so much more than procreation. The Bible tells us, Lo tov heyot adam levado. It's not good for a human being to be alone. Eve is described as an ezer kenegdo, a helpmate beside the first human being. So marriage is about enriching our lives through partnership and caring. It's about establishing homes where Jewish tradition can be lived and practiced. It is about fidelity and commitment, responsibility and faithfulness between two people, and those values ought to apply in all relationships, regardless of gender. I'm not sure I understand why two loving men or women should be denied the opportunity to declare their commitment, not only to one another, but to the values that make for a Jewish home and a Jewish life. We all know the story of the very first love affair, the very first wedding, the very first marriage held in the Bible. The 3rd chapter of Genesis tells the story. Adam was lonely, living by himself in the Garden of Eden. And so God cast a deep sleep upon him. God took the rib from Adam. He fashioned the rib into an entire person. And out of Adam's rib, God made Eve. And this is the myth or legend of how the institution of marriage was born. Adam and Eve were forever attracted to one another, the story goes, because they felt complete whenever they were together. They had two bodies, but just one soul. What a great marriage. What a great romance. And this is the lesson of the story of Adam and Eve. But flash forward a few thousand years to right now. And unfortunately, the story only works well if the characters are named Adam and Eve. It doesn't have quite the same happy ending if the characters happen to be named Adam and Steve, or Eve and Sally, or Stephanie and Sarah. Oh well, you get the point. Most societies treasure everything in marriage until things aren't quite so easy. As soon as there's a variation from the norm, things fall apart, and the center will not hold. So here is the problem, and here, as Shakespeare says, here is the rub. Some people think that marriage should be a beautiful, permanent, sacred, and honorable institution, as long as it's not between two people who love each other, like gay men or women. Some may question why I preach on such a topic. But how can I not address the greatest civil rights issue of our generation? Should gays and lesbians have the same civil rights, the same rights to property, the same rights to inheritance, the same rights to making a medical decision for a loved one, the same rights to marry as the rest of us do? At the end of the day, what really is wrong in granting same-sex couples the right to marry? No matter what you may have heard, there is absolutely no proof that gay marriage spells the end of society as we know it. I hear it all the time. People want to quote the Bible, the Torah, those few verses that criticize gay sexual activity. But as Reformed Jews, we are bound to read the Bible critically and scientifically. In other words, what the Bible says for the year 2000 BCE is not necessarily true 4,000 years later. The only major condemnation of male homosexuality in the Torah comes from Leviticus. The Bible says if two men have sexual relations, it's an abomination. Abomination? It's pretty strong language, and presumably condemns homosexual activity for all time. That's what some would have you believe. Not having read the entire Bible puts you at a disadvantage. The term abomination, which sounds so indisputable in English, is actually quite ambiguous in the original Hebrew, which I have written about previously, as has my friend and colleague Rabbi Bruce Warshaw. Calling something an abomination doesn't mean the same thing in Hebrew as the translation implies. The word in Hebrew is actually toeva. And toeva in the Bible simply means things that, at that time, our tribe did not accept. To'evah in the Bible also describes working on Shabbat. Oh, who works on Shabbat? To'evah, you're an abomination. Witchcraft, many types of sexual relations, and of course my favorite abomination, or To'evah in the Torah, if you eat oysters, lobsters, clams, crabs, or particularly shrimp cocktail, you are an abomination. Oh my gosh. Just forget about gay marriage. Apparently those of us who have ever dined at Joe's Stone Crabs or Red Lobster are in really big trouble. In any case, I hope you catch my drift. In order to understand obscure biblical passages, you have to understand their context. Let me be perfectly clear about gay marriage. The Reform movement stated a decade ago that it is time for us to recognize committed gay marriages in the same way that we honor heterosexual marriages. This is where I stand. We are not talking about abstractions now. This is not a contemplative sermon about theoretical men or imaginary women. This is a declaration of intent, a sermon about real things and about real people. The right for gays and lesbians to marry is about you and me, because maybe this is about your child, or maybe it's about mine. Maybe the right to gay marriage relates to your grandchild, to your sibling, or to your best friend. So if your son or daughter is gay and comes to you and asks, will our rabbi welcome me and my partner into the presumed and supposed open gates of this synagogue? The answer is simply yes. The answer to full equality for gays and lesbians, the answer to gay marriage, at least from this pulpit, is yes. Yes to complete equality and equal rights for gays and lesbians today. Yes to equality tomorrow, and yes, even the day after that. This is where I stand. It was not so long ago that it was against the law in many states for a black person to marry someone white. And yet today we look upon those days when interracial marriage was against the law. And we wonder what planet those people lived on to deny the love that dare not speak its name. This is where I stand. To forbid complete equality to gays and lesbians is to plant one's feet firmly on the wrong side of history. One day, 50 years from now, your children or your grandchildren will ask themselves, why was it even necessary to give a sermon like this? And I suspect that as soon as 20 years from now, those who will remember and those who will reflect upon the sermon I give tonight will give pause, because for our children and our grandchildren, the right for gay marriage will be commonplace in complete acceptance. This is the direction I believe history will take us. As Dr. Martin Luther King once taught, the arc of history is long, but it always bends upwards toward justice. This is where I stand. I hope that at the end of the day, you too will all choose to stand with me. I was honored to officiate for Cantor and Sarah at their wedding just a few short months ago. And I forgot to say something then that I wish to say now. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, eternal God, sovereign of the universe, who has kept me in life, sustained me, and enabled me to reach this profound and most joyous occasion in my life. Amen.